The sun hung low over the Texas horizon, its heat pressing down on the dusty military training ground. The air smelled of gun oil and grit, a sharp reminder that this was no ordinary field. It was the proving ground for new recruits. Inside the shooting range, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. It was the day when recruits got their first chance to prove themselves with live fire, the day reputations were born and futures were decided. Dozens of fresh faces filled the long, barracks-like hall, all wearing identical fatigues, their nerves hidden beneath forced bravado. Most were young men, broad-shouldered, restless, eager to show they belonged in the United States military. They traded jokes, bragged about skills they didn't yet have, and clapped each other on the back in loud demonstrations of confidence. And then there was Emily. She sat quietly at the end of the bench, tying the laces of her boots with deliberate calm. Her uniform fit loosely, hanging from her small frame, and her hair, pulled into a tight bun, only accentuated her sharp, focused features. At just over 5 feet tall, she looked out of place next to the towering men who filled the room with noise. They noticed her, of course, they always did. The whispers followed her wherever she went. She's gonna quit before week 2, probably signed up for the paycheck. She doesn't even look strong enough to carry a rifle. Emily ignored them. Words didn't matter here. The only thing that mattered was what happened when the trigger was pulled. Still, their laughter was a constant presence, not sharp enough to wound, but persistent enough to remind her she didn't belong not in their eyes. When the sergeant entered the room, the chatter died instantly. Sergeant Collins was a square-jawed veteran with a voice like gravel and the patience of a storm. He didn't tolerate weakness. He didn't tolerate excuses. And above all, he didn't tolerate failure. "All right, listen up," he barked, pacing across the room. "Today, you'll show me if you can handle a rifle. No excuses. You either hit your mark or you don't. And if you don't, you'll wish you had stayed home." The recruits straightened. Collins signaled toward the range, where rifles were lined up neatly, each gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Targets were already set up at 100 yards, unmoving silhouettes that seemed to dare the recruits to try. "Step up when your name's called," Collins ordered. "Pick up a rifle. Show me what you've got." One by one, recruits approached. Some hit their marks, most struggled, and a few embarrassed themselves entirely. Collins barely reacted. He'd seen it all before. What mattered wasn't the score. It was how they carried themselves. Confidence or fear, that was what he measured. Finally, a voice called out, "Read, Emily." For a moment, silence followed. Heads turned. A couple of recruits snickered. Emily rose slowly from the bench and walked toward the rifles. Her steps were steady, but every eye followed her. "She's actually going to try?" one whispered. "This ought to be good," another chuckled. Collins raised an eyebrow. He wasn't a man easily amused, but he couldn't help the faint smirk tugging at his lips. To him, this looked like a waste of time. He'd seen fragile recruits before they cracked under pressure, or worse, they made mistakes that endangered others. Emily reached the rifle rack. She studied the weapons briefly, her hand hovering before she chose one. It wasn't random. She inspected it with practiced precision, checking the weight, the alignment, the stock against her shoulder. She handled it not with curiosity, but with familiarity. Yet the room only saw a young woman fumbling with something too big for her. The laughter started low, like a ripple across the room. Then it grew louder. "She can barely hold it up." "Don't drop it, sweetheart. She's gonna cry before she shoots." Even Collins let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "Read," he said gruffly. "If you're gonna waste my time, at least try to look like you know what you're doing." Emily glanced at him briefly. Her expression didn't change, her calm unwavering. Without answering, she stepped toward the firing line. The recruits leaned forward, eager to watch her fail. She planted her feet. Her stance was balanced, deliberate. She shouldered the rifle, adjusting slightly until it fit perfectly against her. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed, her finger rested on the trigger. Not heavy, not rushed, but ready. For a moment, the laughter dimmed. Something about the way she moved, the way she carried herself, didn't fit the image of someone out of place. It was too fluid, too precise. Still, they convinced themselves it was an act. She'd pull the trigger, miss the target, and become another joke for the night. Emily inhaled slowly. The weight of the rifle seemed to vanish in her hands. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto the target. The noise of the barracks faded until there was only the stillness of her breath, the distance of the silhouette, and the rhythm of her heartbeat. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot rang out, sharp and clean. A puff of dust erupted dead center on the target. The laughter stopped. Collins blinked, his smirk fading. The recruits stared in disbelief. Emily didn't lower the rifle. She didn't look back. Instead, she inhaled again, steadied, and fired a second shot. Another bullseye. A murmur spread through the room. No way. Must be luck. She can't do that again. Emily did it again. A third shot. Dead center. This time, no one spoke. Collins stepped forward, squinting at the target through his binoculars. He adjusted them once, then again, as if the result might change if he looked harder. The shots weren't just accurate. They were grouped so tightly they could have passed for a single bullet hole. Emily lowered the rifle, her expression calm, almost indifferent. She set it down carefully, her movements deliberate, controlled. Not a trace of arrogance touched her face. She didn't smile, didn't seek approval. The room was silent now, the same silence that follows the unexpected, the kind that makes people question what they thought they knew. Collins cleared his throat, trying to mask his surprise. "Reed," he said slowly, his voice quieter now. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Emily met his gaze. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Not pride, not fear, but something unreadable. Then she gave a faint smile, the kind that revealed nothing, and answered softly, "Nowhere that matters, sir." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Her answer only deepened the mystery. Whoever Emily Reed was, she wasn't what they thought. For the first time since she arrived, the laughter was gone. And for the first time, the barracks understood that the smallest soldier in the room might just be the most dangerous. The sharp crack of Emily's first bullet still echoed faintly in the rafters, as if the walls themselves were reluctant to let go of the sound. For a long suspended moment, no one moved. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The soldiers had expected a clumsy attempt, maybe a missed shot that would leave Emily embarrassed and humiliated. Instead, the bullet had cut straight through the still air and landed dead center. The barracks had been loud all day, filled with chatter, jokes, and the swagger of new recruits. Now it was swallowed in silence. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't look over her shoulder to see their reactions. Her world had shrunk to the distance between her eye and the target. 100 yards away, the small black mark on the paper looked impossibly far to some of the others, but to her, it was as sharp and close as if she could reach out and touch it. She adjusted the rifle again, her breathing measured. Her index finger curled lightly against the trigger, applying only the pressure needed. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her back, the disbelief rippling through the room, but it didn't matter. The second shot rang out. The round cut through the air, faster than thought, and when it struck, the sound of metal rang faintly as the bullet punched a hole inches from the first, so close it almost touched it. Now the silence wasn't just surprise, it was unsettled. The recruits had laughed because they thought she was harmless, fragile, out of place. But her second bullseye forced them to rethink what they were seeing. One lucky shot was possible. Two? That was harder to dismiss. Someone muttered nervously from the back. Fluke. Has to be a fluke. Emily's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard that word all her life, fluke. As though skill, practice, and discipline could be brushed aside as coincidence. But she didn't rise to it. She inhaled slowly, letting the tension in the room melt away until there was only her heartbeat again. Her third shot split the air. When the dust cleared, a third perfect hole appeared, nearly stacked on top of the others. Gasps filled the room. This wasn't luck. This was precision, frighteningly controlled precision. Soldiers who had mocked her now leaned forward, unable to believe what they were seeing. Some squinted at the target as though distance was playing tricks on their eyes. Others exchanged glances, searching for some explanation. Holy hell, one whispered. She's grouping them. Sergeant Collins lowered his binoculars slowly. His eyes, normally flat and unreadable, carried a flicker of something rare uncertainty. He'd seen sharpshooters before, men and women hardened by years of combat, who could make a rifle sing like this. But a raw recruit? No, not like this. The fourth shot came before anyone could recover. It was as if Emily wanted to end all doubt, to erase even the thought that her first three were anything less than deliberate. The bullet struck cleanly, almost touching the first three. By now, the whispers had died out completely. The recruits, who had been so eager to laugh, now stood frozen, eyes locked on the target. Their confidence faltered, and for the first time, Emily's presence weighed heavily on them. She wasn't just competent, she was something else entirely. Collins cleared his throat, the gravel in his voice suddenly softer. "Read," he said carefully. "Stand down." Emily lowered the rifle. Her movements were fluid, unhurried. She clicked the safety back on, set the weapon down on the stand with a care that suggested respect rather than fear, and stepped back. Still, she didn't look at anyone. The silence that followed was louder than laughter had ever been. One recruit, taller than most, with a cocky smirk that had rarely left his face until now, tried to break the tension. "It's still just targets," he said, his voice louder than necessary. "Anyone can hit paper." But his words lacked conviction, and the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Another muttered back, "Then why couldn't you?" The room tensed again, this time not with mockery, but with a strange mix of unease and admiration. Emily finally turned her head slightly. Her eyes, calm and steady, swept briefly over the group. She didn't glare, didn't smirk, didn't feed off their silence. But there was something in her gaze, a quiet authority that unsettled them more than anger ever could. Collins approached slowly, boots heavy against the concrete floor. He stopped in front of her, studying her expression. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Reed?" Emily met his stare without blinking. For a heartbeat, she considered answering honestly, letting the weight of her past spill into the open. But she decided against it. That wasn't why she was here. With a faint, unreadable smile, she said, "Nowhere that matters, sir." Collins frowned. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but the way she said it calm, certain, made him hesitate. He looked back at the recruits, who still hadn't recovered, and returned his gaze to her. There was something he recognized there, something he couldn't name but had seen in only a few soldiers before. "Back to your seat," he ordered finally, his voice firm, but lacking its usual sharp edge. Emily obeyed without question, walking back to the bench as if nothing remarkable had happened. She sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. Around her, the others shuffled awkwardly, their earlier bravado stripped away. For the rest of the day, recruits fired their shots, missing, fumbling, struggling to keep steady. Every mistake seemed amplified under the memory of Emily's perfect string of bullseyes. Some tried harder, others faltered more. It didn't matter. The comparison was unavoidable. When the exercise ended, Collins dismissed them, his voice gruff but distracted. He kept glancing at Emily as though trying to fit her into a box that didn't exist. That night in the barracks, the whispers began. She didn't miss once. No way a recruit shoots like that. Nobody does. You think she's shut up. Don't even say it. They speculated endlessly, but none dared approach her directly. Emily remained quiet, cleaning her boots, writing in a small notebook no one else dared to peek at. If she heard the whispers, she gave no sign. For them, the mystery was infuriating. For her, it was survival. She had no interest in being their friend, their rival, or their curiosity. She had one purpose, and one purpose only. And for now, her secret was hers alone. But that single day had changed everything. Where there had been laughter, there was now silence. Where there had been mockery, there was now unease. And where there had been a group of recruits eager to dismiss her, there was now a group of soldiers who would never forget the sound of her first 4 shots. And deep down, Emily knew this was only the beginning. The barracks after lights out was never truly silent. The hum of ceiling fans cut through the thick Texas heat. Boots creaked against wooden floors as restless soldiers shifted in their bunks, and the occasional burst of muffled laughter rose and fell like waves. But tonight was different. Tonight, the laughter was gone. Instead, whispers filled the air, low and insistent, drifting from bunk to bunk like smoke. The recruits couldn't stop talking about her. Emily Reed. Did you see her grouping? You can't fake that. She's hiding something. Nobody just walks in and shoots like that. Maybe she trained before coming here. Some private thing, you know? No. Another voice interrupted, sharper, unsettled. That wasn't training. That was something else. The barracks grew quiet again. No one wanted to say what they were really thinking, that she had done something. They weren't supposed to understand. Something only elite soldiers could do. Emily lay in her bunk, eyes closed, listening. She'd learned long ago how to tune her body to the noises around her, how to rest even in the presence of curiosity, doubt, and suspicion. The whispers didn't bother her. She'd expected them. In fact, she welcomed them. Better whispers than laughter. Still, she knew this moment would not pass unnoticed. Skill like hers couldn't stay hidden forever. A military had eyes and ears everywhere. A single report from a sergeant, a single anomaly on a test score, and the right people would come. Looking, and that, she knew, was exactly what was coming. And next morning, training resumed. Recruits lined up for drills, the sun already punishingly hot as it rose higher over the base. Sweat soaked through uniforms, and tempers flared under the strain of long hours and constant correction. But even as the day dragged on, one truth was clear. Every eye drifted toward Emily. She didn't brag. She didn't stand apart on purpose. She followed orders with the same discipline as the rest, ran when told to run, pushed herself through obstacle courses without hesitation. But her silence, her calm, unnerved them more than if she had flaunted her skills. During the midday break, Sergeant Collins approached her. His face was a mask, but his eyes held questions he hadn't yet voiced. "Reed," he said gruffly, "walk with me." The other recruits exchanged glances. Being singled out by Collins rarely meant anything good. Emily followed him to the edge of the training field, where the shade of a battered oak tree offered a brief respite from the sun. Collins stopped, crossed his arms, and studied her with an intensity that would have rattled most recruits. "You gonna tell me what that was yesterday?" he asked finally. Emily's expression didn't change. "Sir, don't play dumb with me. 4 perfect shots. Perfect. You think I haven't seen raw recruits before? I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. And nobody shoots like that first day." Emily paused, considering her words carefully. "I practiced before I came here." Collins shook his head. "Practiced where? At a carnival booth?" His tone sharpened. "Don't insult." "Me, Reed. I know what I saw. That wasn't practice. That was precision. That was trained." Emily met his gaze. For the briefest second, something flickered in her eyes, an echo of memories, of a past life filled with long nights, endless drills, and mentors whose names were never written down. But just as quickly, the flicker was gone. "With respect, sir," she said softly, "I don't think where I practiced matters." Collins's jaw tightened. He wanted to push, but something in her tone stopped him. There was a weight there, an unspoken warning that whatever he uncovered might not be something he wanted to carry. Finally, he grunted, turned, and walked away. "Get back in line." Emily obeyed. But that night, a report left his desk, written in terse, precise language. "Unusual recruit. Recommend further observation." It didn't take long. 2 days later, word spread through the base like wildfire. A general was coming to observe training, a rare event that immediately put everyone on edge. Generals didn't waste their time on recruits unless something extraordinary had happened. The barracks buzzed with speculation. "You think it's because of her?" "Of course it's because of her. Why else would a general show up here? Maybe she's in trouble. Maybe they don't like secrets." Emily said nothing. She tied her boots, tucked her notebook away, and prepared as if it were just another day. Inside, however, her heart beat differently. She knew this moment would arrive. She had only hoped it wouldn't come so soon. When General Marcus arrived, the base seemed to hold its breath. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, every medal on his chest gleaming beneath the harsh Texas sun. His reputation preceded him, decorated, respected, feared. He was known not just for his combat record, but for his uncanny ability to see what others missed. Soldiers whispered that Marcus could look at a man or woman and know instantly if they were worth his time. The recruits lined up in rigid formation, their spines straighter than ever before. Collins barked commands, trying to mask his own nervousness. Marcus's eyes swept across the line. They landed on Emily. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. But in that long, unblinking stare, Emily felt as though he could see straight through her. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying across the entire yard. "Reed, step forward." Emily obeyed. Her boots struck the ground with measured confidence, though her pulse thrummed louder than the cadence of her march. She stopped in front of him, saluted sharply, and held her ground. Marcus studied her for a moment longer. Then, without looking away, he said to Collins, "Rifle." Collins hesitated, then handed one over. Marcus nodded to the range. "Targets. Moving, 200 yards. A ripple of unease spread through the recruits. 200 yards? Moving targets? For a raw recruit, that was nearly impossible. It was a test designed not to measure skill, but to expose weakness. Emily took the rifle. She didn't argue, didn't hesitate. She walked to the line, adjusted her stance, and raised the weapon. The chatter around her dimmed until there was nothing but the wind, the weight of the rifle, and the steady rhythm of her breath. The target slid into motion, gliding side to side across the distance. Emily fired. The bullet struck dead center. She fired again, dead center. A third time. A fourth. Each shot hit with flawless accuracy, as though the targets weren't moving at all. The recruits stood in stunned silence. Collins's mouth tightened, the binoculars lowering slowly from his face. Marcus's expression didn't change. But, after a long pause, he took a step forward, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. "Black Talon Mark," he said. The words rippled across the range like a shockwave. Soldiers stiffened. Collins froze. The recruits glanced at one another, confused, nervous. They didn't know what it meant, but the way Marcus said, it told them everything. It wasn't praise. It was recognition. Emily lowered the rifle. Her face remained calm, but inside, her past and present collided in a single phrase she hadn't expected to hear spoken again. The whispers would only grow louder now. Her secret was no longer hers alone. The moment General Marcus uttered her name, the training ground transformed. The heat, the buzzing insects, the weight of sweat-soaked uniforms, all of it faded beneath the heavy presence of a man who carried authority like a weapon. The recruits had seen officers before, but Marcus was different. He didn't shout, didn't bluster. His silence alone commanded more respect than a dozen speeches. Emily stood at the firing line, rifle in hand. Her expression was calm, but her pulse tapped, a steady rhythm against her throat. This was no ordinary test. Generals didn't come to watch recruits stumble through drills. They came to confirm suspicions. Marcus gave a single nod. Again, the target's word to life, moving faster now, weaving unpredictably twice. The distance. The recruits shifted nervously, many knowing they themselves couldn't land even one clean shot at such a range. They waited for Emily to falter, to reveal the limit of her skill. But Emily didn't falter. She breathed in, aligning the rifle as though it were an extension of her body. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. Bullseye. The target jolted, painted. With another perfect hole, she fired again, and again. 4 shots in swift succession, each hitting its mark with surgical precision. Her stance never wavered, her movements fluid, as if the chaos of the moving targets only made her steadier. By the time she lowered the rifle, silence pressed down on the field like a weight. The recruits stared, stunned into stillness. Even Sergeant Collins, who had seen battlefields and hardened snipers, found himself gripping the binoculars tighter than he meant to. General Marcus stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. He stopped a few feet from Emily, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Black Talon Mark?" he said again, louder this time. The recruits exchanged confused glances. Some frowned, others whispered nervously, but none dared speak the question aloud. What did it mean? Why did the general's voice carry such weight? When he said it, Collins's eyes widened. He knew the term. He'd heard it only once before, in hushed tones at a command meeting, never expecting to encounter it in person. It wasn't a title. It wasn't even a rank. It was a designation. A code whispered in the upper echelons of the military. Soldiers with the mark weren't just sharpshooters, they were legends. Trained in programs so secret, most officers didn't even know they existed. Marcus's stare didn't leave Emily. "Where did you train?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Emily held his gaze. For the briefest moment, memories surged. Long nights on foreign soil, cloaked instructors teaching her to control not just her weapon, but her mind. Lessons etched into muscle memory until they became instinct. The ghosts of her past brushed against her present, but she pushed them down. "With respect, sir," she answered evenly, "I don't think I'm at liberty to say." The recruits stiffened. They weren't used to hearing anyone speak to a general like that. Marcus, however, didn't look offended. If anything, his eyes sharpened with interest. "Good," he said finally. "You remember your oaths." Emily inclined her head, but said nothing more. A silence stretched before Marcus turned to the recruits. "You laughed," he said evenly, his gaze sweeping over them. "You mocked her before she even touched a rifle." His voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. Now you know better. Strength is not loud. Precision is not showy. Real skill doesn't announce itself. It proves itself. A few recruits shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, their earlier arrogance crumbling into shame. Marcus returned, his attention to Emily. "Pick up the rifle again," he ordered. Emily obeyed. This time, Marcus didn't give a range or distance. Instead, he pointed toward a line of tin helmets set up along the far side of the field, balanced precariously. "On posts. Take them down, one shot each, no misses." The recruits sucked in sharp breaths. The helmets were narrow targets, nearly impossible to hit consistently, even at closer range. Emily raised the rifle. Her breathing slowed, her body relaxed, into a stillness that seemed unnatural. One by one, the helmets clanged as bullets tore through them, each shot ringing across the range like a bell. She moved with the same rhythm every time: inhale, aim, exhale, fire. By the final shot, not a single helmet remained. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't disbelief. It was awe. Marcus allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of what they'd witnessed sink into every recruit. Finally, he spoke. "You've seen what mastery looks like. Some of you will never touch this level. But you will remember this moment for the rest of your lives." He turned to Collins. "Double her training regimen. Pair her with advanced drills. She's wasted on standard exercises." Collins nodded stiffly, still processing what he'd seen. Marcus stepped closer to Emily again, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "They'll talk now. They'll whisper. Let them. But don't let their whispers distract you. You've walked paths they can't imagine. You've earned this. Mark, don't forget what it means." Emily's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "Yes, sir." Marcus's gaze lingered on her a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away. The recruits didn't move until he was gone. When the weight of his presence lifted, murmurs erupted again, louder than before. "What's Black Talon Mark? Is it like some secret thing? Did you see her? Not one miss, not one." Emily said nothing. She set the rifle down gently, her hands steady, even as her chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. She didn't need to explain. The more they speculated, the safer her silence became. But inside, she knew one truth. The general hadn't come just to observe. His arrival was a signal. Her cover, fragile as it had been, was slipping away. A mark had followed her here, and now there was no hiding it. That night, when the barracks lights dimmed and whispers filled the air again, Emily lay awake in her bunk. The laughter was gone, replaced by unease, respect, and curiosity. But she knew respect could turn to fear, and fear could turn dangerous. For Emily Reed, being recognized was both a blessing and a curse. And the moment Marcus said those words aloud, her life on base would never be the same again. The following morning, the training ground no longer buzzed with the usual careless chatter. The air was heavier now, thick with questions nobody dared voice aloud. Recruits stole glances at Emily whenever they thought she wasn't looking there. Expressions a confusing mix of respect, envy, and unease. Gone was the mocking laughter. In its place was a silence that clung to her like a second skin. Emily noticed everything. The whispered exchanges at breakfast, the way conversations paused when she entered the mess hall, the nervous distance some recruits kept as if proximity to her carried hidden danger. She had been invisible once. Now she was something else entirely, an enigma. Sergeant Collins gathered the recruits at the field, his tone unusually sharp. "Yesterday, you saw something rare. Don't mistake it for luck, and don't think it makes the rest of you useless. Discipline still matters. Determination still matters. She's not your measuring stick. She's your reminder that mastery exists. Learn from it, but don't let it crush you. His words did little to ease the unease. Instead, they deepened the curiosity. One recruit, a tall boy named Harris, finally blurted, "Sergeant, with respect, what's Black Talon mark?" The field went still. Collins froze, his jaw tightening. For a moment, it seemed he might shut the question down completely. Then, with a measured exhale, he spoke. "It's not my place to explain." The recruits exchanged frustrated looks, but none pressed further. Emily felt the heat of their stares burning into her. She kept her expression neutral, but inside, her chest tightened. She knew this silence couldn't last forever. Secrets had a way of unraveling, and Marcus had already pulled one thread loose. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself summoned to Marcus's office. The message had come through Collins, who offered no explanation, only a stern, "The general wants to see you now." Emily's boots echoed in the long hallway as she approached the heavy oak door. She paused, took a breath, and knocked. "Enter." Marcus sat behind his desk, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He gestured for her to sit, though his gaze never softened. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he began, voice even. "But your performance raises questions. Questions the recruits aren't equipped to ask, let alone understand." Emily shifted slightly. "With respect, sir, I prefer they not be answered." Marcus leaned back, studying her. "And yet, silence only breeds more dangerous questions. Curiosity can be more destructive than truth. Tell me, Emily, how long did you think you could hide it?" Her throat tightened. She had trained for years to keep her past compartmentalized, locked away where no one could reach. But Marcus was right. The mark had surfaced, and now it wasn't just hers to carry. "I never wanted recognition," she admitted quietly. "All I wanted was to serve like everyone else." Marcus's gaze hardened. "You're not like everyone else." The words struck her like a blow, not in their sharpness, but in their truth. Marcus rose from his chair and walked to the window, his back to her. "Do you know how few bear the Black Talon mark?" he asked. "Less than a dozen in the history of our armed forces. Each one was forged through programs so classified most generals aren't even briefed on them. You didn't stumble into this. You were chosen." Emily stared at her hands, memories clawing at the edges of her mind. The isolated compound, the endless drills, the instructors who pushed her past every limit she thought she had. Nights without sleep. Days where food was a reward, not a guarantee. The Black Talon program wasn't training. It was transformation. She swallowed hard. "Chosen or not, sir, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a burden." Marcus turned then, his expression unreadable. "A burden, yes, but also a responsibility. You've been given a skill set few can even comprehend. You don't get to bury that just because it's heavy." Emily lifted her eyes to his, steady despite the turmoil inside. "What happens now?" "That depends," Marcus replied. "How you carry this mark will determine not just your future, but theirs." He gestured vaguely toward the field where the recruits trained. "To them, you're already a symbol. They'll either rise because of you or crumble in your shadow. Which one they choose will be influenced by how you stand." Emily fell silent. The weight of his words pressed heavily on her shoulders. When she left the office, the whispers seemed louder than ever. Recruits lingered near the hallway, there, eyes darting to her, before quickly looking away. A few offered stiff nods of respect, but most avoided her gaze. That night, in the barracks, Harris finally confronted her. He wasn't mocking like before. His voice trembled with a mixture of awe and frustration. "Reed," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "what are you?" Because that wasn't normal. Nobody shoots like that. Nobody. Dozens of eyes turned to her, waiting. Emily met his stare, her voice calm. "I'm a soldier, same as you." Some scoffed at the answer. Others seemed unsettled by it. Harris shook his head. "No, you're something else." The tension in the room thickened, but Emily offered no further explanation. Instead, she climbed into her bunk, turning away from the stairs. Her silence spoke louder than words, but it didn't satisfy anyone. If anything, it only deepened the mystery. Over the next week, Marcus's orders were carried out. Emily's training regimen was doubled. She was tested with longer distances, harsher drills, live combat simulations that left others staggering. Each time, she completed them with unnerving precision, as though her body knew the rhythm before the exercise began. The recruits watched, some inspired, others intimidated. A few began to admire her quietly, mimicking her discipline, adopting her focus. Others, however, whispered with suspicion, fear blossoming where respect couldn't take root. Collins noticed it all. One evening, he pulled Emily aside. "You need to understand something," he said quietly. "Soldiers fear what they don't understand. They might follow you, or they might turn on you. Which way it goes depends on how you handle this." Emily nodded, but inside, she felt the unease growing. Because Collins was right. And she knew, sooner or later, someone would push harder for the truth. On the fifth night, as she sat outside, under the dim glow of the barracks light, Harris approached again. This time, his tone wasn't challenging. It was almost pleading. "My brother died overseas," he began, voice low. "Sniper fire. Clean, precise. No warning. When I saw you out there, read, it reminded me of that. Not in a bad way, just real. You've seen things, haven't you? Things none of yous can imagine." Emily looked at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden the weight she carried. But the mark wasn't just hers. It was a vow, sealed in secrecy. "I've seen enough," she said softly. "Enough to know skill isn't what makes a soldier. Heart does." Harris nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the stars. Emily leaned back, closing her eyes. The mark was no longer hidden. And with every whisper, every test, every unspoken question, she realized something. The Black Talon wasn't just her past. It was her future, whether she wanted it or not. And soon, she would have to decide what that future meant. The announcement came before dawn. Sergeant Collins stormed into the barracks, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Up, full gear. You're being tested today, and it won't be drills. This is a live combat simulation, urban terrain, shifting. Objectives, high stress. Fail here, and you won't just embarrass yourself. You'll prove you don't belong." The recruits scrambled, tension thick in the air. Boots thudded against wooden floors, straps snapped tight, rifles were checked and rechecked. But underneath the noise, every pair of eyes flicked toward Emily. Even in the half-dark, her presence was unmistakable. She didn't speak, didn't brag. She moved with calm efficiency, strapping on her gear as though this were just another morning. For her, perhaps it was. They were loaded into trucks and driven to an abandoned mock town at the edge of the training base. The air smelled of rust and dust, buildings riddled with bullet scars from countless exercises before them. Collins stood before the recruits, clipboard in hand. "Your mission is simple. Move through the town, secure the hostage, and extract without casualties. But there's a catch. Your enemy isn't paper targets. It's us." As if on cue, several instructors in full tactical gear emerged from the shadows. Their helmets gleamed under the pale sun, rifles held with easy confidence. These weren't mere trainers. They were combat veterans, men and women who had seen war up close. Whispers rippled through the recruits. Emily's eyes flicked toward Marcus, who stood on a raised platform overlooking the town. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. But she could feel his gaze on her like a weight. The exercise began with chaos. The recruits split into squads, some too eager, others too hesitant. Gunfire erupted almost immediately, blanks that cracked, with deafening force, simulating real rounds. Smoke grenades hissed, filling alleys with choking haze. Emily's squad was pinned down within minutes. Harris shouted orders, his voice raw with panic. Left flank cover. No, wait, fall back. The recruits stumbled, tripping over their own confusion. An instructor's voice boomed from a rooftop, mocking them as he fired a burst that forced them to the dirt. Pathetic. You wouldn't last 30 seconds out there. Emily crouched behind cover, her rifle steady even as her teammates scattered. Her breathing was calm, eyes scanning the chaos, tracing patterns others couldn't see. This wasn't just a test of muscle. It was a test of vision. And she had been trained for this long before they ever dreamed of wearing a uniform. She moved like water. A sharp signal with 2 fingers sent Harris and another recruit sprinting to cover. A low whistle drew fire away, just long enough for 2 others to reposition. She didn't bark orders, she guided them with precision, each gesture pulling them into rhythm. At first, they resisted. But when her plan worked, when they broke free of the pin and advanced through the alley, they started listening. Within 10 minutes, the squad that had been in shambles now moved with uncanny coordination, their panic slowly giving way to trust. But the simulation was far from over. The hostage was hidden inside a warehouse at the far end of town. Guards patrolled the perimeter, instructors who knew every corner and every trick of the terrain. Emily crouched near a broken wall, observing the pattern of their movement. Every step, every pause, every blind spot, they stood out to her like ink on paper. Harris whispered, "We can't take them head on. Too many." Emily's eyes stayed locked on the guards. "We don't need to. Follow my lead." She slipped into the shadows, her body low, movement silent. 2 recruits hesitated before following. Harris swallowed his fear and went after her. They moved like ghosts, weaving between cover, pressing into silence when flashlights swept past. Every step brought them closer to the warehouse until finally, Emily froze, holding up a hand. One guard stood inches away, his rifle slung casually as he scanned the street. Emily reached down, picked up a shard of rubble, and tossed it lightly to the side. The guard's head snapped toward the sound, his body shifting. In that split second, she signaled. 3 recruits slipped past him unnoticed, melting into the warehouse. The hostage, a dummy dressed in fatigues, was strapped to a chair. They freed it quickly, adrenaline pumping. But the second they stepped outside, the ambush came. Gunfire cracked from rooftops. Smoke billowed. Shouts filled the night. The recruits dove for cover, clutching the dummy as though it were flesh and blood. Panic clawed at them again, chaos threatening to unravel everything. But Emily was already moving. She darted into the open, rifle snapping with precision. Her shots weren't random. They were deliberate, aimed at suppressing fire, forcing instructors to duck long enough for her squad to advance. "Go!" she shouted, her voice sharp for the first time. "Keep moving!" Something shifted then. The recruits didn't hesitate, they obeyed. For once, their trust in her was absolute. Step by step, alley by alley, they fought their way back toward the extraction point. Some stumbled, others froze, but Emily was always there covering, guiding, driving them forward. It wasn't brute force. It was orchestration. By the time they reached the final street, the instructors had regrouped, blocking their path in a line of tactical armor. There was no way around. Collins's voice boomed from behind the blockade. "This is where squads usually break. You want to quit now, or fight and prove you belong." The recruits faltered, looking at each other, at the wall of enemies they couldn't possibly overcome. Then Harris looked at Emily. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. Then, to everyone's shock, she slung her rifle behind her back and stepped forward, hands empty. The instructor stiffened, unsure of her intent. Emily raised her voice, calm but sharp. "You're focused on me. You should be focused on them." At her signal, 2 recruits tossed smoke grenades from the sides. Thick clouds erupted, shrouding the street. Shouts rang out as visibility dropped to nothing. Through the smoke, Emily charged not toward the instructors, but toward the nearest rooftop ladder. She climbed fast, heart hammering, lungs burning. At the top, she positioned her rifle and fired blank after blank into the air, sowing chaos and confusion. Her squad didn't waste the chance. They slipped past the blockade, dragging the hostage through the cover of smoke, sprinting toward the extraction truck. By the time the instructors cleared their vision, it was too late. The mission was complete. The horn blared, signaling the end of the exercise. Recruits collapsed to the ground, coughing, sweating, hearts still pounding. Some cheered, others simply stared in disbelief. Collins approached, helmet under his arm, eyes scanning the exhausted squad. His expression softened. Slightly not approval, not yet, but recognition. "You're the first team in 3 years to extract without losing your hostage," he said. "And we all know why." All eyes turned to Emily. Marcus, from the platform, gave a small nod. It wasn't praise, it was confirmation. The whispers that had followed her all week were now replaced with something heavier, respect, and maybe, just maybe, fear. Emily stood still, her chest rising and falling, sweat dripping down her face. She didn't smile, didn't bask in the attention, because she knew this wasn't victory. This was exposure, and exposure was dangerous. The base was unusually quiet the morning after the simulation. Recruits normally laughed, argued, or grumbled about blisters over breakfast, but today the mess hall was silent. Eyes darted toward Emily when she entered, trays pausing mid-her. Some gazes held awe, others unease. A few outright suspicion. It wasn't her imagination. She could feel it pressing against her, like a storm building overhead. Harris was the only one brave enough to sit with her. He slid into the seat across the table, his voice low. "They're saying things about you." Emily kept her focus on her tray. "They've been saying things since day one." "No," he whispered, leaning closer. "This is different. They're saying you're part of something called Black Talon." Emily froze. The metal fork in her hand went still, untouched food cooling in front of her. She forced her voice to remain steady. "And do you believe that?" Harris hesitated. "I don't know what to believe, but I saw what you did yesterday. You don't move like the rest of us. You don't think like the rest of us. It's like," he swallowed, "it's like you've done this all before." Emily's silence was answer enough. The rumors only grew. By midday, they weren't whispers anymore. They were open speculation. "Black Talon's not real," one recruit insisted. "My cousin swore he saw files about it." "Something off the books," another countered. "Doesn't matter what it. As if she's part of it, she doesn't belong here with us." The tension thickened until it reached Marcus himself. He summoned Emily to his office that evening. The room was dim, the only light a desk lamp casting long shadows across neatly stacked files. Marcus stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You knew this would happen," Emily said softly. He didn't turn. "I hoped it wouldn't, but soldiers talk, and whispers are more dangerous than bullets." Her eyes narrowed. "So what now? You shut me away again?" Finally, he faced her. His expression wasn't anger, it was weariness. They need to know, at least part of the truth. Otherwise, suspicion will eat this place alive. The next morning, the recruits were ordered into the briefing hall. They filed in with restless energy, eyes flicking toward Emily as if she carried an invisible brand on her skin. Marcus stepped onto the platform at the front, his voice carrying over the murmur. By now, you've heard rumors. Some of you dismiss them. Some of you cling to them. I'm going to tell you enough to end the guessing. The hall went still. He gestured toward Emily. This recruit carries the Black Talon mark. And yes, Black Talon is real. It was an experimental program developed years ago, an elite training initiative designed to push young operatives beyond conventional soldiers. Intelligence, instinct, endurance. The best of the best, trained from childhood. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus's voice hardened. Most of the program failed. It broke those who entered it, physically, mentally. Only a few survived. Those who did were given the Black Talon mark as proof. His gaze rested on Emily. She is one of them. The silence was suffocating. Recruits stared at her with wide eyes, some filled with awe, others with unease. One finally spoke. So she's not like us at all. Marcus's eyes flashed. She's here, training beside you, fighting beside you. That makes her one of you, if you let it. But the damage was done. When the briefing ended, recruits clustered in groups, their whispers no longer hidden. Some looked at Emily with respect, admiration even. Others with suspicion sharp enough to cut. Harris caught up to her in the hallway. His voice hushed. So it's true. Emily didn't meet his gaze. Parts of it. What parts? The ones you shouldn't ask about. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her bunk. The truth was out now, but it wasn't freedom. It was exposure. Her mind replayed Marcus's words. Black Talon was real. Most didn't survive. She was marked. But he hadn't told them everything. He hadn't told them what the mark meant, why the generals whispered when they saw it, why her presence unsettled them. And he hadn't told them about the others, because Emily wasn't the only survivor. 3 days later, the base received visitors. Black SUVs rolled through the gates, windows tinted, plates unmarked. Out stepped men in suits, their eyes cold, movements precise. They weren't ordinary officials. Whispers spread fast. Government. Intelligence division. Emily watched them from a distance, heart tightening in her chest. She knew their kind. She had seen them before, standing in shadowed corridors when she was younger, faces she wasn't meant to remember. That evening, Marcus called her again. His expression was grim. They're here because of you. Emily's jaw tightened. I knew it wouldn't stay buried. They're not here to observe, Marcus said quietly. They're here to test you, or remove you. The following day, training was interrupted. The men in suits took control of the facility, setting up new drills, stricter and harsher than anything before. Recruits grumbled, exhausted under the weight of impossible expectations. But it became clear quickly that these drills weren't for everyone. They were for her. The scenarios were tailored urban extractions, high-pressure decisions, situations that mirrored her Black Talon training. They wanted to see if the program still lived inside her. And with every test she passed, their eyes grew sharper, more calculating. One night, Harris confronted her in the barracks, his voice shaking. What do they want from you? Emily's hands tightened around the strap of her gear. Not me, what I represent. Which is what? She looked at him. Then, eyes shadowed with something heavier than fear. A weapon they thought they'd lost. The tension inside the camp reached a breaking point. Some recruits started to rally behind her, inspired by her calm under fire. Others pulled away, whispering that she was dangerous, unnatural. And then came the incident. During a late-night drill, one of the recruits, spurred by fear and anger, turned on her. His hands shook as he leveled his training rifle at her chest. "You don't belong here. You're not one of us," he shouted. The hall froze. Even the instructors didn't move. Emily stared at him, her voice quiet. "Put it down." He didn't. His finger twitched on the trigger. In the next heartbeat, Emily moved, not violently, not with rage. She stepped forward, her hand twisting the rifle aside with practiced precision. The weapon clattered to the floor, harmless. The recruit stumbled back, pale and trembling. Everyone else stared at her, the truth settling in their minds like a stone sinking into water. She wasn't just trained. She wasn't just skilled. She was something else entirely. And for the first time, Emily saw the fear clearly in their eyes. That night, Marcus found her outside the barracks, staring into the dark horizon. "They're not going to let this go," he said quietly. "The government, the generals, the others who still remember what Black Talon was." Emily's fists clenched. "Then I'll leave." "You can't," Marcus said firmly. "Running only proves them right. The only way forward is to face it, to show them you're not their weapon anymore." Emily turned her face toward the shadows, her voice barely a whisper. "They don't want me free. They want me controlled." Marcus's silence was answer enough. The night wind carried the weight of his unspoken truth. Emily knew then that the real battle wasn't inside the camp. It was with the ghosts of Black Talon, ghosts that had returned to claim her. And if she didn't fight them, they would consume her and anyone who stood at her side. The camp was no longer a camp. What had once been a training ground now felt like a cage. The presence of the government officials was suffocating, their black SUVs stationed at every gate, their men shadowing her every move. Training sessions became interrogations. Meals felt like surveillance. Even the air seemed heavier, like the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Emily knew the pattern. This wasn't observation, it was containment. They weren't studying her. They were waiting for her to break. And if she didn't break, they would make her. Marcus had grown restless, his calm demeanor replaced by frustration. She noticed the lines deepening at the corners of his eyes, the way he rubbed his temples more often, as though wrestling battles no one else could see. "They're pushing for a decision," he said one night in his office. His voice was low, but the tension in it cut through the silence. "They don't want you here as a soldier. They want you reinstated under their control. Black Talon reborn." Emily's chest tightened. "And if I refuse?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "Then you disappear." The words were blunt, cold, but they carried no malice, only truth. The next morning, the recruits were assembled again, though this time it wasn't for training. The men in suits stood at the front, rigid and silent. Their leader, a tall man with steel-gray hair and an expression like granite, stepped forward. "Emily Carter," he said, voice sharp enough to command the room. "You are hereby ordered to accompany us for reassignment under Black Talon jurisdiction." The hall went dead silent. Emily didn't move. Her fists clenched at her sides. "I'm not your weapon." Murmurs rippled through the recruits, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring at her with wide-eyed admiration. The official's lips thinned into a razor line. "You don't have a choice." Before she could answer, Harris's voice cut through the room. "She does." Heads turned. Harris stood from his seat, his shoulders squared despite the tremor. In his voice, "She belongs here, with us, not with you." The official's cold eyes flicked toward him. "Do you know what she is? Do you understand what that mark means?" "She's a soldier," Harris shot back, "and she's one of us." The room erupted into chaos, recruits arguing, voices clashing. Some shouted support, others demanded she be taken away before she endangered them all. The division Marcus had feared had reached its breaking point, and Emily stood in the middle, the eye of the storm, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, the camp wasn't the same. Whispers turned to arguments, arguments to threats. Lines were drawn not just between her and the officials, but between the recruits themselves. Some wanted to defend her. Others wanted her gone. Emily sat alone in the barracks, staring at the mark on her arm, the jagged symbol inked into her skin so many years ago. Black Talon, proof of survival, proof of ownership. Marcus found her there, his expression grim. They'll move soon. If you don't go with them willingly, they'll take you by force. She didn't look up. And what happens when I resist? His silence told her everything. The attack came at dawn. The officials didn't announce it. They didn't give her the dignity of a choice. They came with armed men, storming the barracks before the first light broke the horizon. But Emily wasn't asleep. She had been waiting. The moment the door burst open, she was on her feet, moving with a precision born of training, older than any of the soldiers facing her. The first man went down before he even raised his weapon. The second stumbled as she twisted his arm, sending his rifle clattering across the floor. Chaos erupted. Recruits scrambled awake, some rushing to defend her, others to get out of the way. The camp turned into a battleground, shadows flickering under the pale morning light. Harris was at her side, his movements unpolished but determined. "We can't fight all of them." "We don't need to," Emily said, her breath sharp. "We just need to make them understand." By the time the dust settled, the ground was littered with discarded weapons, soldiers groaning where they'd been disarmed. Emily stood in the center, chest heaving, her fists still clenched. The steel-haired official stepped forward, untouched by the chaos, his eyes burning with fury. "This only proves what we've said," he spat. "You are dangerous, uncontrollable, a liability." Emily's voice cut through him like a blade. "No, this proves I'm more than your weapon. I'm not a liability. I'm a person, and I will not let you own me." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. For the first time, the recruits weren't divided. They stood behind her, some battered, some shaken, but united. Harris, bloodied lip and all, stepped forward. "She stays." The officials exchanged looks, their authority slipping as the weight of unity pressed against them. Marcus stepped into view then, his voice carrying with quiet steel. "You came here for control, but what you found is strength. She belongs here not because of what she was made into, but because of who she chose to be." In the end, the officials retreated. Their mission failed. They left with threats, promises of consequences, but they left. And for the first time since the whispers began, the camp exhaled. That night, Emily sat under the stars outside the barracks. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after storms. Harris sat beside her, nursing his bruises. "You know they'll be back," he said softly. "I know," she answered. "Then what now?" Emily looked up at the endless sky, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and resolve. "Now," she said, "I stop running from what I was, and I start becoming who I choose to be." Her hand brushed the mark on her arm. It was no longer a chain. It was a reminder, not of what they had made her, but of what she had survived. The Black Talon might have claimed her past, but her future was her own. And for the first time, Emily believed it